I need to share this with someone, because keeping it to myself feels unbearable. I've told my family, my neighbors, even strangers online, but no matter how many times I repeat it, I still feel this heavy pressure inside me, like I have to warn people. So I'm putting it here, hoping someone will understand. It's August of 2021 as I'm writing this, but the story stretches much further back. I can't remember the exact year, but it was around 2014, maybe 2015. Back then, I was 26, with a steady job and a girlfriend named Clara, who is now my fiancée. I never went to college, so I had already been working for a while, and life felt steady, predictable, and safe. Clara and I had just moved into a house in a quiet rural neighborhood outside of Asheville, North Carolina. It was the same home I had grown up in, an old wooden farmhouse my parents handed down to me. My father had inherited it from his own father, so it carried a long history within my family. Over the years, it had been repaired here and there, but the creaking floors and the weathered siding gave away its age. Unlike most homes around, ours stood at the very end of the road, pressed against the edge of an enormous forest. On two sides, our yard blended directly into the tree line. When I was a kid, my brothers and I would wander through those woods for hours, but no matter how far we went, we never reached the end. There was always more miles of tall trees, streams, and hills that seemed endless. To many people, it would have felt isolating, even threatening, but I enjoyed it. I liked the sense of privacy. I liked the silence. We had only been living there for a few months when it all began. It was winter, sometime after Christmas. I don't remember the exact day, only that the ground was covered with fresh snow. That Sunday morning, I stepped outside to grab coffee, the small ritual I looked forward to every week. As I walked toward my truck, I noticed something strange. In the snow, right beside the driver's side door, there was a trail of footprints. At first, I thought they were Clara's. Maybe she had slipped outside before me for some reason. But when I followed the prints with my eyes, I realized that couldn't be right. The tracks didn't come from our front porch or circle the house. They came straight from the woods, stopped at my truck, then turned back the same way. Someone had walked directly from the trees to my car, and then vanished back into the forest. No other steps led anywhere else. No attempt to come near the windows, just my truck. I remember standing there for a long time, staring, my stomach tightening. Later that day, I asked Clara if she had gone outside that morning. Of course, she hadn't money. I wish I could give you more details about that first time, but it's all a blur now. What I do remember is how unsettled I felt that entire week. Every time I looked out the window toward the woods, I felt like something was there. 2 winters passed without anything else happening. Then came February 2017, the winter I'll never forget. That morning, I stepped outside on my way to work and froze in place. The yard was covered in footprints. They were everywhere, by the windows, around the back porch, circling the shed, across the driveway. It was as if someone had spent the entire night pacing around the house. I didn't panic, but I can't pretend I wasn't shaken. I had no time to study them closely, but before leaving, I checked the property quickly, making sure no one was hiding. I texted Clara on my way to work so she wouldn't be blindsided. I left early that day. The image of those footprints haunted me, and I couldn't focus on anything else. When I returned, Clara met me in the yard, her face pale. She pointed to one set of tracks and told me she had been staring at it for hours. That's when I noticed it. The prints weren't made by shoes. They were bare feet. The shape was clear, toes and all. The thought of someone wandering around barefoot in the snow made my skin crawl. Clara tried to convince herself it was some kind of animal, but no animal left prints shaped exactly like human feet. I called my father, who had lived in that house for decades, and asked if he had ever seen anything like it. He said never. He told me to grab my rifle and follow the tracks into the woods. I didn't want to. Clara begged me to call the police, but I knew they wouldn't do anything without evidence of a crime. Trespassing alone wasn't enough. I promised her I'd only follow the trail until sunset. The footprints stretched deep into the forest, and after half an hour, I came across something that made my stomach sink. The tracks split into two different trails. Until that moment, I had assumed it was only one person. But now I wondered, was it two? Or had someone been walking backwards to confuse me? The thought of being outnumbered in those woods was enough to turn me around. I hurried home, rifle heavy in my hands, scanning the trees constantly. That night, we did call the police. As expected, they told us there wasn't much they could do. The next morning, a heavy snowfall erased every last track. For a few years, nothing happened. Clara and I got engaged, planned our future, and even started talking about children. Life was normal again, almost peaceful. Sometimes we would mention the footprints, but with time, the fear dulled. Until last January, I woke up to find footprints everywhere once again. My chest went cold, the old dread flooding back instantly. Only this time, it was worse. The prints led to the shed, and when I checked, some tools were missing. This was no longer harmless. Whoever it was had stepped onto my property, rummaged through my things, and taken what they wanted. I called my friend Nathan, an experienced hunter who knew the woods far better than I did. He owned advanced equipment, including a thermal scope for his rifle, and when I told him what was happening, he drove over that afternoon. Clara begged me not to go, but I promised her we would be careful. We followed the prints deep into the forest, and after nearly an hour, they split again. Nathan cursed under his breath, pointing out how deliberate it seemed, as though someone wanted to mislead us. We kept going, doubling back whenever we hit a dead end. As the sun began to sink, the prints grew fresher, deeper. Nathan suddenly stopped and raised his scope. His body went rigid. I could barely breathe as I watched him. After a long silence, he handed me the rifle and motioned for me to look. Through the thermal scope, I saw them. 4 figures in the snow. At first, I thought they were animals, but they weren't. They were human. 2 tall ones, hunched over. 2 smaller ones, clinging to a tree, jerking their heads unnaturally. They were naked. Their bodies glowed with heat through the scope, and I realized they were eating something. The sight made my throat tighten. Nathan and I crouched behind a tree, too afraid to move. After a while, the 2 larger figures lifted the smaller ones onto their shoulders and walked deeper into the forest. We waited until we were certain they were gone before heading back. Hours later, when we finally reached the house, Clara was still awake, trembling. I gave her only the barest details, but she understood enough. We called the police again. They promised to check the woods in the morning, but after a few hours of searching, they ended it, saying there wasn't enough evidence to justify a full investigation. Winter is coming again soon, and Clara and I lie awake most nights, listening for movement outside. We talk about moving, but so far we haven't managed to leave. I don't know why it's happening here, to us, or what those things want. Some people I've told say they're harmless. Others warn me we're in real danger. But I know one thing for certain. Those footprints will come back. Last year, in July of 2022, I made a decision that would change the way I look at the wilderness forever. I had always been passionate about hiking, especially long solo trips that tested both my body and my mind. For years, I dreamed about covering a major section of the Appalachian Trail, and that summer, I finally committed to it. The plan was simple in my head. I would leave my car at the end point of the section I wanted to tackle, get a ride to the trailhead, and then spend about 10 or 11 days hiking back to my car. It sounded like the perfect escape, and at first, Everything went according to plan. The first few days were incredible. The trail was everything I had hoped it would be. Towering trees stretched endlessly in every direction. The path twisted through quiet hills and valleys, and there was this peaceful stillness that only comes with being miles away from civilization. I was in good shape, so the miles slipped by without too much strain. When the sun started sinking, I'd head a little way off the trail, pitch my tent, and settle in for the night. I always liked keeping my campsite hidden, fewer chances of someone stumbling across me by accident. For the first 2 nights, nothing unusual happened. It was just me, the trees, and the sound of the wind. But by the 3rd night, everything changed. What happened that night has made me step away from hiking altogether. I woke up with this overwhelming sense that something was wrong. It wasn't a noise or a movement that startled me. It was instinct, that gut feeling you can't explain, but know better than to ignore. My heart was pounding even before I unzipped the tent. I stepped outside with my flashlight and rifle in hand, scanning the trees. Everything looked normal. The woods were quiet, my campsite untouched. Relieved, I ducked back into the tent. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My wallet was gone. At first, I thought I had misplaced it. Maybe it had slipped out of my pack, maybe I left it just outside the tent. But after searching every pocket and tearing through all my gear, it was clear someone had taken it. My ID, credit cards, cash, all of it, gone. I tried to convince myself I had lost it earlier in the day, but that explanation didn't sit right. I was careful with my things. I always had been. The idea that someone had opened my tent while I slept and taken only that one item sent a chill through me. Over the next few days, more things went missing. At first, it was just one of my lighters, then a knife, then some energy bars. Always small, always something that didn't stop me from continuing, but enough to remind me that someone was watching, someone was following. By the 4th day, I couldn't deny it anymore. I was being stalked. There was no cell signal that deep into the trail, no way to alert anyone. I thought about turning back, but it wouldn't have saved me much time. No matter which way I went, I still had to hike, and I still had to sleep. And sleep was no longer safe. I kept calm by reminding myself that I had a rifle, but then a darker thought hit me. Why hadn't the thief taken it? Why take food and clothes, but not the one thing that could protect me? It was as if whoever was out there wanted me to know they weren't afraid of the gun. That night, I tied my tent shut from the inside, hoping it would slow down anyone who tried to get in. I forced myself to stay awake as long as possible, gripping the rifle, my body trembling with exhaustion. Eventually, I drifted off. To my relief, when morning came, everything was still there. No one had entered. But the damage was done. The paranoia had sunk in. Every hour of hiking felt heavier than the last. My thoughts circled endlessly around the idea that someone was just out of sight, watching me. My chest was tight, with a kind of fear I had never felt before. By the 5th day, my mind began to play tricks on me. The first time, I thought I stepped into a puddle. I felt cold water splash against my leg, soaking my sock. I stumbled forward, certain I had hit mud or a stream, but when I looked down, the ground was bone dry. The hallucination was so real, I stood frozen, staring at my boots, wondering if I was losing my mind. Other things followed. A shadow darting at the edge of my vision, only to vanish when I turned my head. The sound of movement in the bushes that ended in silence. My own thoughts twisted against me, feeding on my exhaustion. At night, the terror always grew worse. I would tie my tent shut, lie down with my rifle at my side, and try to keep my breathing steady. Sometimes I had to splash cold water on my face just to calm down enough to rest for a few hours. But then one night, I woke to the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps circling my camp. I froze, gripping the rifle so tightly my hands hurt. The steps moved around the tent, then faded into the trees. I sat awake for hours, eyes wide open, body too stiff to move, until the sun finally rose. That morning, I packed my camp as fast as I could, hands shaking so badly it took me twice as long. I decided I couldn't stay another night. I was less than 2 days away from my car if I pushed hard. So I promised myself I would hike through the night. The hours dragged on. When darkness fell, I kept going, flashlight in one hand, rifle in the other. I had never hiked in the dark before, and it was worse than I imagined. The beam of my light only revealed fragments of the trail, the rest of the forest swallowed by blackness. My nerves were fraying with every step. About an hour into the night hike, I heard it. Footsteps behind me. I spun around, my flashlight cutting across the trees, and for the briefest second, I saw a figure slip behind a trunk. My stomach lurched. I raised my rifle and aimed, shouting for them to come out. What stepped out wasn't what I expected. It was a man or something close to one. His skin was scratched and raw, patches of hair matted across his face. His body was bare except for a pair of shorts I hadn't realized were missing from my pack. The sight was so wrong, so primal, that I couldn't process it. He moved toward me slowly, as though unbothered by the gun aimed at his chest. My instincts took over. I fired a warning shot into the ground beside him. The crack echoed through the trees. For a second, he froze. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, he darted back into the forest, vanishing into the darkness. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, pushing myself faster than I thought possible. My legs carried me for miles, until finally, mercifully, the trees opened and I reached my car. I locked myself inside, shaking uncontrollably, and called the police. They came, but all they told me was that I shouldn't linger there. I didn't need to be told twice. I left that night, driving until the forest was far behind me. Even now, the part that unsettles me most isn't just the figure I saw. It's the hallucinations. The puddle that wasn't there. The shadows that didn't exist. They felt so real that I sometimes wonder if I really know where reality ended on that trail. It will be a long time before I step onto a trail again, and if I ever do, I won't be alone. I'll tell anyone who listens, be careful, stay alert. And if you're ever on that section of the Appalachian Trail, keep your guard up, because I know for certain I wasn't alone out there. I need to say this first. If I get some details wrong, forgive me. This is not my own story, but something I heard many times from my closest friend. He told me years ago, and it stayed in my mind ever since. It is one of those stories that crawl under your skin, the kind you never really forget, even if you wish you could. My friend's father Martin worked as a logger in northern Alberta, Canada, during the late 1982nd. He operated a tree saw, a massive machine built to cut down thick trees and slice them into sections. His job demanded long hours, sometimes 16 to 20 hours a day, and most of the time he worked deep in forests where no one else went. The way the company paid him was simple. The more trees he cut, the more he earned. So Martin often pushed himself until exhaustion. Half of his work was alone, but the other half he shared with his partner, a man named Howard. They communicated using radios, especially when they worked at opposite ends of the logging site. This system usually worked well, until the day it didn't in test. Many years ago, Martin and Howard were sent to a remote site far up the foothills of the Rockies. It took the company nearly a month to clear a road wide enough to bring equipment into the forest. By the time they started working, they were already in one of the most desolate places Martin had ever seen. The mountains stretched endlessly, And the silence there was different. It felt heavy, almost pressing. 10 days into the job, things began to change. Both men started hearing strange chatter on their radios. At first it was faint, muffled, almost like broken whispers hidden under layers of static. No matter which channel they switched to, the chatter followed. That alone made Martin uneasy, because anyone who has used work radios knows that isn't supposed to happen. As they moved deeper into the forest, the voices became clearer. They still couldn't make out full conversations, but they could hear fragments, ordinary words spoken in a casual tone, yet impossible to understand fully. The strangeness of it settled into Martin like a sickness. Soon after, they began to notice disturbing signs of human presence. Rusted cans scattered in the dirt, footprints that led nowhere, fire pits with half-burnt logs, and even small camps hidden in the undergrowth. That part of the forest was so far removed from civilization that no one should have been there. The sight of those things made both men uneasy, in a way no wild animal ever had. One afternoon, Howard stumbled upon a tent hidden off a narrow trail. He called Martin, and together they looked inside. What they found was worse than anything either had expected. There was a single sleeping bag, a duffel bag stuffed with children's underwear, coils of duct tape, rope, and crude hand-drawn sketches of children in horrific situations. Among the things was a photograph of a fresh apple sitting on a tree stump, proof that whoever had been there was still close. Howard wanted to leave immediately, but Martin, always focused on finishing the job, insisted they stay and push through. They decided to keep radio use limited to emergencies only and try to finish as fast as they could. That night, they sat inside their camper, unable to shake off the dread. The radio came alive again. This time, they could make out full fragments of conversation. Two men were talking casually about collecting water and gathering wood for a fire. Martin realized with horror that these men were most likely connected to the tent. Howard stayed calm, but Martin's nerves were beginning to fray. The following evening, things grew worse. When the men's voices returned, Martin made the mistake of speaking into the radio, demanding to know who they were. The line went silent immediately. That silence felt heavier than the voices themselves. Howard was furious with him for announcing their presence, but it was too late to take it back. Around midnight, Howard woke Martin. Someone was outside the camper. The stillness in the air was suffocating. Martin's first instinct was to reach for his gun, but he realized the magazine was missing. Panic set in. Howard had no weapon at all. They stayed completely still as they noticed the faint pressure on the camper door handle. The door creaked slightly but did not open fully. Then came scratching along the door, slow and deliberate. For minutes, neither man moved. Finally, Martin signaled to Howard that he would check. He gripped a flashlight, his hand trembling, and walked toward the door. Just as he reached it, the door flew open and a blade slashed across his face. Pain exploded through him as he stumbled out of the camper and hit the ground. A man pinned him, pressing a knife to his throat, while another kicked him again and again. Howard acted fast. He leapt from the camper and tackled the man with the knife. The second man fled into the dark, and the one Howard had pinned broke free and followed. Both vanished into the forest. Howard dragged Martin back to the truck, and they drove through winding mountain roads for over 2 hours until they reached the nearest hospital. Martin's injuries were severe. His face was torn, his vision in one eye permanently destroyed. The attack was reported, but nothing ever came from it. 2 weeks later, as the logging crew continued to finish the job, tragedy struck again. One of their co-workers was found bound, gagged, assaulted, and murdered in a ditch. No arrests were made. Years later, Martin still lives with the trauma. His right eye, clouded and scarred, is a daily reminder of that night. He never slept peacefully again. My friend told me his father often wakes drenched in sweat, shaking from dreams he doesn't talk about. I haven't spoken to my friend or Martin in many years now. Sometimes I wonder how they're doing, if Martin is still alive, or if the forest finally claimed more from him than just his sight. As for me, I've avoided deep forests ever since. Even the thought of being far from civilization makes my chest tighten. It's hard not to remember Martin's story, and the terrible truth hidden in the woods where no one was supposed to be.